We're now joined by a guy who we spoke to a number of months ago, just when Wasp announced that they were about to tour the U.S. for the first time in about 10 years. And at that time, when I spoke to Blackie Lawless, I said, hey, when things get closer to this all starting and you get into rehearsals and everything, call in and give us an update. And to his word, he's doing exactly that. Joining us now live on the phone is the one and only Blackie Lawless. How are you, bud?
I'm good, sir. How are you?
I'm good. It seems like just yesterday we talked, but it wasn't. It was really quite a while ago because at that point the tour had only been announced, and now in the 6 months or so that it's been, the response to this, Blackie, I was saying to the audience before you came on, has been incredible. I'm hearing from friends and people I haven't heard from in years saying, "Hey, are you going to catch a Wasp show? We're really excited about this." It's got to feel great for you, huh?
Well, and that's in no small part to yourself, because you are the guy that has held this fort down, in this genre where there's really not been a lot of support in a lot of areas, and so that makes you the godfather now. And it's much
Well,
appreciated.
thank you, man. As I told the audience, you and I have a lot of history. You were one of my first interviews 40 years ago, if you can believe it. Next year, we've both been doing this. but we both started really young, right, Blackie?
Oh yeah, well, I hadn't even been born yet. I was telling somebody the other day about, I was thinking about, I told you early before, or when we had done the interview before that, when I was putting all this stuff together, the idea of doing a book came to me, and I was working a little bit on it the other day. And, the whole idea of maturity and all that stuff really started to come into my head. And I don't mean where I am in my life now. I'm just talking about in life in general. And I was thinking, that I was one of those people that was a late bloomer. I was in my it took me really, before I turned 30 years old, I was really in my mid-40s before that happened. So it was just like, I was one of those guys that's been allowed to live in arrested development, which
Hey,
most musicians do.
Along those lines, something I never asked you before that I'm curious about when you talk about your earliest years, and of course you were in some bands prior to Wasp and all of that. When did you first adopt the name Blackie Lawless, and where did it come from? What was the inspiration for it?
Well, I've had it since I was about 13. Well, the first part anyway. My mother was from Houston originally, and there was a guy there that had that first name, Blackie, and apparently he was some sort of local gang member. And my mom had worked for the USO during the Second World War, and she was a professional dancer. They would do these shows. They would go around to service clubs. And this guy walked in one night, and he got into an argument with one of the sailors that was there, and he took a switchblade and he stuck it in the guy in his stomach and walked around the guy with the blade in him.
Oof.
So he did a circle around his body. And I heard that story, and it left a lasting impression. And so the color of the hair and all that, it just stuck. So it's been with me ever since.
And where did Lawless come from? It just sounded cool with it?
No, I thought it definitely had a ring to it. But really, and I know you being a football fan, you're probably going to laugh at this, but during the 70s, there was a guy that played for the Dallas Cowboys. He was an all-pro center named Burton Lawless. And, the back of their jerseys with that name on it, I couldn't resist that,
Yeah, for sure. Does anybody call you by your birth name at all?
If I go someplace where somebody doesn't know me, but very few people do. And, I said, even before my mom passed away, she used to call me Blackie. And I said, when your mother calls you by that, that's your name. So...
I asked the same question to Alice Cooper if anybody ever called him Vince, and I think he said only one. I think only one person. I forget who he said, but it was pretty funny. Calls him that, but yeah, that's always something. I've known you forever, but I never knew the origins of that. All right, so tell me about. Get us updated on what's happening, because when we talked, You hadn't even started rehearsing. You hadn't started working up the set. You hadn't started working up the stage show, although you certainly had a concept. Now you're full on. You're starting in Vegas in like less than 10 days. Give us the update on how everything's going.
From the time we started talking to the point where it is now, one thing led to another, and it grew, and it grew, and it grew. And production-wise, and I'm gonna just be absolutely honest with you right now, we are taking an arena-sized show into theaters, and that there is no way I can over-exaggerate that. This thing is huge, and it's barely going to fit. But it just, one idea led to another, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and consequently more expensive because of it. But it just, I thought, you know what? I'm going to get one time in my life to do this, a 40th anniversary, and we're going to do it right. And we're going to make this literally the biggest and best show we think we've ever done. Certainly since Headless Children in 1989. That was a big show, and it was expensive to do. And this is actually technically bigger, physically bigger than that. I mean, I'll tell you, it goes back to the idea of Inside the Electric Circus back in '87. And what happened with that was I had this idea of doing something that looked like a 1930s carnival, something more like an old sideshow more than a circus. And that was my original germination of the idea. And so because we were moving into arenas then, people were telling me, well, you know, it needs to be bigger. People in the back of the room need to see it. It's got to be flashier, da-da-da-da-da. And so it grew and grew and grew as well. But it started to morph into this thing that started to look more like Vegas. And when it was finished, it was big and it was impressive, but it wasn't exactly what my vision was. And we've done that this time, and we're staying true to it. This thing now, when you walk in, you're going to see these giant circus banners. There's 16 of them on the stage, and these things are huge. They're like, 10 feet tall by 8 feet wide. I mean, the top of the stage set goes to 16 feet all the way around, and it's almost 40 feet across. And within that, there are projection screens that you won't see right away. They'll come later in the show. But when you walk into this, it's going to look like a combination 1930s sideshow circus carnival meets Road Warrior meets some voodoo ceremony. I mean, it is a combination of a lot of things that we've done over the years, and it's a hodgepodge of stuff that we didn't think could work to begin with. We thought, trying to combine those many elements was going to look like a train wreck. But we found a guy who specializes in doing circus banners. They're all hand-painted, and they are cool looking. When you see them, everybody's going to smile when they see this, because it is so cool and so authentic looking. And so there's only 2 guys left in the United States that paint these things, and this guy is one of them. And so he helped really put all this together, and it has been an enormous mountain of work to get this show ready. And like I said, I'll say it again, we're taking an arena-sized show into smaller venues.
So are you going to be able to put everything in some of these places, or depending upon the venue, is there some stuff you're going to have to leave in trucks?
Nope. We believe, based on the research that we've done on the venues that we've done, I mean, when you're playing theaters, they're proscenium-sized stages, and, there's a lot of ceiling height. And so we one of the biggest problems we ran into was lighting, because the stage set will block the vast majority of the lighting that already exists in these places. So we're having to bring lighting with us, and because of that, it's going to have to be foot lighting. Now, with today's technology, that lighting can do things that could not do even 10 years ago. I mean, this stuff is amazing looking, but it comes from the floor. And because of that, it creates the old footlight effect, the old limelight circuit, which was in theaters to begin with. Now, when this band first started, that's what we used the vast majority of the time, because the way the lighting looks nowadays, everything comes from overhead. and it gives you that big show look. When it comes from beneath, it creates shadows, and it does all kinds of things that you don't get from overhead lighting. And I love that effect. Always have. You know, I mean, for me, it probably goes back to, you know, some of the psychedelic bands that came out of the 60s because they all used foot lighting back then. But nobody does that anymore. And the effect it creates is devastating. You know, so it all, that we did not plan from the beginning. It just sort of happened because the stage set grew. But it ended up being one of those good mistakes after it was all said and done. Again, you know, it adds onto the toll, you know, of the cost of everything that goes up. But I saw this stuff. My lighting director came in and he showed me. He says, if we're going to do this, this is what we need. And it blew me away. I mean, the stuff's all computerized now. And you can take LED lights, which is what they are, and those things can be focused where they look like lasers now. I mean, it's amazing technology.
And as far as the material you're going to play, when we spoke to you last, you were still kind of figuring that out. Obviously, this is 40 years celebrating, so you want to touch on the whole catalog. But have you fine-tuned a set list that you're pretty comfortable you're going to go with every night, or do you envision changing some stuff out as you go?
Well, we're hoping to change stuff out as we go, and we're doing that on purpose. But I just got off the phone with Jim Rhoda, who says hello to you, by the way.
I'll send him my best.
Right. Jim is a great guy, and for people that don't know him, he's a producer now and has been doing that for quite some time for doing film. As a matter of fact, he did, the Foo Fighters, the Studio 666 and things like that. So he's putting the video stuff together, and we're going back and forth over the pictures that we're using for this now, because it's pretty in-depth, and all this stuff has to be cut to the music that's going on in the show. So it's really the best way I can describe this show, and I hope this doesn't put people off, but the best way I can describe it, it's not so much like a rock band out there playing as much as it is a Broadway play, because it's choreographed in every song. Now, it's still going to look like a rock band when you come out there, but they won't recognize, nor does the audience really need to understand the technology that's going on behind it. But to get all these elements to work in sync with each other, there's a boatload of work that's gone into it, and the rehearsals that we're into now with it to make this stuff all play at the same time, it's hairy. I mean, it really is. When we did Headless in '89, we were only the second band to ever use film then. Pink Floyd had used it before us, and the technology was really, really primitive at the time. So we went to them and we said, okay, well, how'd you do it? And so, they gave us the information they had, and we worked on it from there. But even still, we had to pioneer a lot of stuff to get it to work. Well, most everybody uses it now in one way or another, but the way we're doing it now has turned out to be enormously complicated again, because the stops and the starts in the show. And that's another thing, that when this show starts, because of the technology involved, we're hoping to not stop this thing, because once it starts, it's very, very difficult, because everything is so rigidly timed. It's very difficult to get this to stop. And I know this might sound like a bunch of hodgepodge to people right now, because, like I said, it's kind of like opening a watch. Most people just use it to tell time, but most people never open it up to see what makes it tick, literally. But that is what's going on with here. It is enormously complicated. But I don't want, when people come to the show, I don't want them to stop and think about, well, how'd they do that? Because it ends up looking like a magic trick. We just want this thing to work as smooth as it can. And to be honest with you, we are not to that phase yet. We hope to be finished with all of it this Friday. So as far as parts interchanging, TBA come 48 hours from now.
The tour kicks off October 28th in Vegas. All the dates are listed at waspnation.com. Blackie, I'm curious for you. I mean, what was your personal preparation like to get ready to do this tour? For people that don't know, this might be your first run in America in a long time, but you, Wasp and yourself, you were active in other parts of the world touring for a while. So it's not like you've been inactive for 10 years. But from a personal standpoint, vocally, physically, what's the preparation been like getting ready for this?
It was interesting because back in the mid-'90s, I went through a period where I went in the studio and hibernated for about 2.5 years. And so when it come time to do the tour, I had not been on stage in 3 years. And I remember going into rehearsal the first day, and they handed me a guitar, and I stood there and I thought, I don't know what I'm doing. I felt like a fish out of water. I thought, I don't know how to do this. And the whole first day, I just kind of fumbled around and, literally bumping into walls. And I thought, I don't belong here. I don't know how to do this anymore. And so it took about 2 days to get a grip on it. And I thought, well, when we get ready to start this time, because we've done 3 shows already this year, and I thought it's probably going to be similar to what happened before. But you know what? Surprisingly, it wasn't. And not only was it not like that, it was a total 180. And I don't know why it happened, but I went into rehearsal, and it was like I hadn't been there in a week. And we were playing, and honestly, Ed, I felt this joy I've not felt in a long, long time. And I can't tell you why, but I just remember I just felt this joy while we were playing. And so we went to Sweden to do the first show, and we walked out, and maybe it's been there all along and I never saw it, but I saw a joy on people's faces that was reflecting what I was feeling inside. And I thought, I don't know, like I said, maybe it was there all along and I just never saw it. Maybe this is a result of what happened with the pandemic, where people are finally just able to get out now and do things. Maybe it's a little of all of it. I don't know. But whatever it is, I like it, because like I said, I'm having more fun right now doing this than maybe, certainly since the beginning, and maybe even more so than that because I've got more experience now. So, I know what to expect with a lot of this, but I'm having fun, like I said, that I just haven't had in a long, long time, and I don't know why it is. And for me personally, it wasn't because of the pandemic, because like I said, I'm used to going in the studio and hibernating as it is, so that's nothing unusual for me. When I'm in the studio, the whole world could be falling down around me, and I wouldn't know. So I've been fortunate in that sense to live a very nomadic existence. But I don't know what's different this time. But whatever it is, I'm taking it with both hands.
Yeah, I mean, it's the big questions from the Wasp fans that I don't know if you're ready and prepared or can answer yet. But the one question is, will the raw meat be back? And the second question is, will you play Animal live? Can you answer either of those yet?
All those things can be addressed, but I don't want to say anything until I know 100% of what I'm talking about. Now, as far as the meat, how do I answer this? It's all these things are going to be done, but the technology that we're using to do it, even if I could tell you, I don't think it would make sense to you. I think you're just going to have to see it. So the answer is yes, but not exactly the way you might think. So
is the answer yes to Animal too? Are you giving a definitive yes to Animal coming back?
We have not played the song in rehearsal yet. So I can't tell you.
Well, that if you're like less than 10 days out and you've yet to run through it, that probably bodes against it being in the set, I would think. But then again, I'm sure you could put it together pretty quickly.
Probably. But there are certain things that are out of my control right now. So, like I said, I don't want to say anything until Friday is going to be the reveal day. So we'll know more then.
All right. Well, we'll know more then. And I mentioned to you the people I'm hearing from. Like I'm hearing from people that are friends of mine I've heard from in years. Like, hey, did you hear Wasp is back? Are you going to this show? We got to go to this show. You got to be picking up on some of that, and that's got to feel great. I would think. I mean, after all these years, 40 years doing this, you've really put a big jolt into people that haven't seen you in a while. And I always say absence makes the heart grow fonder. And you haven't been around in a while touring the U.S., but the excitement, I know a lot of these shows were advanced sellouts. Some are close to sold out already. That never happens in touring these days. So this has all got to feel great to you, I would think.
It's been really, really cool, and I mentioned to you when we talked, 6 months back that this all started with a groundswell of the fan base because they were saying, come tour America, and, as we had discussed, promoters out there didn't think that this could happen with us. And so basically I pointed the finger at the promoters, which was true, because any band, I don't care who it is, they'll go anywhere if they're given a decent offer, and that was certainly the case with us, but the offers weren't there. So the fan base, and there was thousands of them that did this. It wasn't like, 100 people. There was thousands of them across the U.S. I've never seen anything like this in all my years of doing this. And obviously technology with the internet allows people to have a voice now where they maybe didn't 20 years ago, but they literally went to promoters and started banging on their doors electronically, via social media, and said, hey, why don't you bring this band there? And the promoters, I'm sure it gave them some mild interest to begin with. But then, once we said, okay, we would like to try this again, are you willing to do this? I think that stayed in their heads, what the fans had done. So like I said, this was a groundswell that I had nothing to do with. So in that sense, to watch what's happened, because, some of these places sold out in 24 hours. And they weren't, there weren't small places, 2,000 to 3,000 seaters. And to watch that is enormously gratifying because that tells you think, well, your fan base has gotten older and, do they still remember? And to watch that happen, I don't care who you are. It's extremely gratifying. And at the same time, it's humbling because you start to realize, yes, you make the records and you write them and all that stuff, but if there's not somebody out there that appreciates what you do, it doesn't mean anything. So it's a nice place to be.
Yeah, no doubt. And the tour wraps up December 11th in LA at the Wiltern. So there's a bunch of dates anywhere you're listening. Again, just go to the website, waspnation.com, and you can get to see the VIP packages, all the tour dates, tickets, everything you need is right there on that site. Blackie, I know that early next year you're going to take this over to England and do the UK and other territories. Have you thought about new music? Have you thought about, is there a new record in the works, or are you just focusing on celebrating 40 years for now and playing live?
Well, yay and yay. We had started working on a record, over a year ago, and I'm hoping to be able to finish it sometime in January, February, before we start the European tour. It won't be out, until after the tour is finished. But I'm hoping to have it, wrapped up by the time we start. I mean, that's the plan. So, you ever seen a dog in the middle of the floor chasing his butt? So that's what's going on here. It's just busy, and it's going to be like this for probably the next year. But then again, all of us lost a big chunk of our lives, with this pandemic. So it's, we're putting the hammer down on this, and we're going to do everything we can. We're going to take this thing all over the world because we go to Europe in March, and then we'll do Australia after that, and then South America. And we've got some plans for next summer, but I don't really want to get into that right now.
And the record that you're working on, that you think will be the next Wasp record, is that going to be a concept record or no?
You know what? what's in my heart right now, and this probably goes back to what I was saying a little bit ago about the joy. I want this to be a rock and roll record, an old time rock and roll record. That's what I'm feeling. I mean, and it could be some sort of adverse reaction to what's going on in the world. Maybe. I don't know. I don't really want to think about it that much. I'm just following my gut right now. I want something that feels good. And that's where my head is right now. And I learned years ago, you make records based on who you are at that moment. And that's where I am at this moment. I want to do something that feels really good.
As a songwriter, do you write on the road, or are you somebody that has to lock away in a room and just focus on it? Or are you the guy that I'm on the bus, or I woke up in the middle of the night, or after a show you're writing?
All the above, because I prefer now, if I can, to be locked away, because it helps me focus. But there are times where things will come out of the blue, or sometimes you'll dream stuff. I mean, I was talking about Headless a while ago. I dreamt Headless with lyrics.
Wow.
Those are always the best ones because you get them for free. There's very little labor involved. But they say once a songwriter, always a songwriter, and you're always writing whether you realize it or not. You're recording that stuff subconsciously in your head. And I heard somebody, psychologist, describe it one time as there's a little man that sits at the door, and he's a guard, and he keeps those doors locked. And the only way to get the stuff out a lot of times is trick him. And to trick him is usually in an alpha or a beta state, which is just before you go to sleep or just before you wake up, where he's kind of half there. And that's where those ideas will leak out sometimes. So it can happen in all those instances, like I said. But when you dream them, those are the best ones because you get them for free. I heard Billy Joel say one time he dreams all his. So that would be the best way to have a songwriting career is just dream them. You wake up and they're there.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many artists I've talked to have told me the same thing, that they've dreamt some of their biggest songs, that they've just, and then they'll wake up from the dream, and while it's still in their head, they'll reach for their phone or their notepad and write the idea down so that they don't forget it.
Exactly. And it's frustrating because if you're in deep sleep and you dream something, to get into the deep sleep and you hear it, and then as you're coming out of the deep sleep, it just somehow evaporates. And it's so frustrating because you can't remember what it is. And just furthermore, when I'm making a record, I'll get probably halfway into a record, and before songs are finished, I'll be trying to sleep, and I'll hear sometimes 3 songs in my head simultaneously. And I tell people, I go, imagine you're trying to sleep, and you have 3 radios going on set to different stations. And that's what it's like. And they're loud, and you can't turn them off.
Right.
And it is maddening at the same time. And it's really frustrating, because, like I said, you're trying to rest because you got to rest because you're going to be in the studio the next day, and you got these 3 PA systems going on in your head at the same time.
Yeah, I'm not a songwriter, and I have issues where I'll have a song in my head out of nowhere, and I can't turn it off just trying to go to bed.
Well, that's a good point because probably everybody, if they've got something really heavy going on and they can't sleep, okay, so imagine that, but imagine 3 of those going on at distinctively different ones at the same time, and they're all occupying the same space. It's enough to drive you to drink.
Yeah. Hey, last thing, and then I'll let you go and get back to rehearsal and prepping for this tour. Totally unrelated to Wasp. I've known you for a long time, and I know you're a big baseball fan, and I know that you even played baseball at one point. So how you feeling about the 4 teams left? What's your prediction for the World Series?
With what's happened this year, I've not really had a chance to watch it like I normally do. I know your Mets got knocked out, and I was surprised at that, to be honest with you. They're a good team. But I was really, really shocked at that. I thought that they would go further than they did. And to be further honest, the teams that I thought, the Dodgers and the Braves, that I thought would go the distance aren't there now. So
yeah, I can't believe the Dodgers and the Mets being out, 2 of the best records. That's That's unbelievable. I mean, yeah, the Mets gutted me, but the Dodgers were a surprise too because I think they had more wins than anybody in baseball this year.
Well, you know what they say, it's not how many you win over the course of that 162 games. You know, it's who gets hot at the right time. And I've seen that my entire life watching sports. It doesn't matter what sport it is. You know, it's like who's clicking, you know, on all those cylinders at the moment they need them. Who's healthy? Is your bench deep enough? All those questions, you know. So, and that always ends up being a thing because I can remember, you know, back to when I was a kid watching this kind of thing happen, and it's always the guys that you don't expect that's going to come up, you know, some 5'5" shortstop that ends up hitting a game-winning home run who's hit 3 home runs all year, you know. And that I heard Sparky Anderson, you know, the great manager from the Reds and the Tigers. He said one time, he says, in those situations, in those big games, everybody's adrenaline's pumping. Anybody can hurt you at any moment, and pitchers know that. You know, so you gotta, if you're out on that mound, you can't take anybody as a gimme when they come up to the plate.
What position did you play when you played?
I pitched and I played first and third base.
You never were you were never in with a minor league. I mean, there were rumors that you could have gone pro. I mean, what's the real story on that? How far did you get?
Well, I had a chance to go play for the Reds farm system, but when I was 17, and I'll tell you a funny story related to the Mets. When I was 17, I really had to make a decision what I was going to do because I've been playing music since I was 9, you know, and I really had to choose because you can't do both. And so I remember the last game that I was involved in. It was the city tournament, and we had won our division, and you know we were moving up the ladder. And a scout from the Mets came in, and I was pitching that day. And so he comes in the dugout, and he's asking me questions: height, weight, you know, where'd you go to school, how long you been playing, all that stuff. They want to know your entire background. And so I go out on the mound. Well, before the game had about a week before the game, I was warming up in the bullpen, and I pulled a muscle on the right side of my rib cage, and it was pretty bad. But I wanted to pitch this game, and so I had an ace bandage wrapped around my rib cage really tight. I mean, I could barely breathe. And so at 17, I was already, you know, in the low 90s. As far as velocity. Wow. And so the first guy came up, and I walked him because I was struggling to control because that ace bandage I was wearing. And so I thought, and the scout from the Mets, he's sitting right behind home plate, and I'm watching. He's writing down everything I'm doing with every pitch, right? And it's distracting to be honest. And I thought, okay, next guy coming up, I'm going to impress the hell out of this guy. And I reared back probably the hardest ball I've ever thrown in my life and hit this kid square in the side of the neck. And he went down like he had been hit with a .357 Magnum. And I thought, shit, I killed this kid, right? And he didn't get up. You know, he just laid there, and I thought, he's dead, you know. And I looked, and the scout from the Mets, he had a briefcase with him. He put his notes inside the briefcase, and he got up, and he just strolled out of the ballpark. And I thought, well, I ain't playing for the Mets now.
What could have been, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, we might never have had Blind in Texas, or we never might have had Love Machine, or I Want to Be Somebody, or any of those great songs. So I'm kind of glad as a rock fan it worked out the way it worked out, although it would have been cool if you were on my Mets. That could have been cool, too. Listen, bud, it's always great to catch up with you. Everybody go to waspnation.com, find your dates, find your info, and go see Wasp 40th anniversary tour. First time in about 10 years touring in America. And I'm definitely going to get out there and catch one or two of these somewhere, Blackie, and appreciate the time today.
You got to come by and say hi.
Yeah, for sure, man. And for those listening, for those going to the shows, Armored Saint opening all the dates. And if you're going to shows in Texas or Oklahoma, you also get Michael Schenker in there, too. So it's a great bill across the board. Great talking to you, man.
I want to say something about Armored Saint real quick.
Yeah.
I was looking at something the other day, and we're going to put this out a few days before it happens. We played a show together at the Troubadour in 1982. It was a Halloween show, and it was October 30th, 1982. Now, for a band to last 4 or 5 years is a miracle for any band. To last 40 years is almost unheard of. For two bands that have lasted 40 years to be playing again 40 years later on the same night, man, the planets have to align for that to happen. I've never heard of that ever happening before. So on October 30th, and I believe we are in Arizona, that will be the 40th anniversary of the first time we played together. So a little bit of trivia I thought was very, very cool.
Yeah, that is very cool. And yes, October 30th, you are in Tempe at the Marquee Theater. So that is exactly where you will be. All right, man, listen, great talking to you. Good luck warming up and rehearsing the rest of the way and fine-tuning it. And best of luck on the road. I'll be in touch.
All right, bud. We'll see you soon.
Take care, Blackie. Thank you.
Bye now. Bye.
See ya. There he goes, everybody. Blackie Lawless. Lot of excitement about that tour. Hearing from people, again, like I said, I haven't heard from in a long time, like, Wasp is back. So that's very, very cool. And as you heard, Blackie with a big show that he's putting together. A show, he says, is an arena show he's going to cram into a theater. So it looks like all the theatrics and production that you would expect from Wasp are going to be present, no doubt.